Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney Yeager, and I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Now, in its 24th year, the museum is committed to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs are meant to illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism through time, and stories of resistance against injustice. Today, we will be discussing the book, The Boy Who Drew Auschwitz, a powerful true story of hope and survival. The Boy Who Drew Auschwitz tells the story of Thomas Geve, a 92-year-old Holocaust survivor from Germany. In June 1943, 13-year-old Thomas and his mother were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Separated upon arrival, he was left to fend for himself in the men's camp of Auschwitz I. During 22 harsh months in Auschwitz, Gross-Rosen, and Buchenwald, Thomas experienced the worst of Nazi cruelty, but he never gave up the will to live. Immediately after liberation, Thomas created more than 80 drawings documenting life around him. Rendered in simple yet poignant detail, the drawings reflect day-to-day life in the camps at the same time as they reveal the shared humanity between Thomas and the other prisoners. We're honored to be joined by Thomas's daughter, Yifat Cohn-Meir, and journalist Charlie Inglefield, who wrote the book with Thomas. Throughout today's program, please feel free to put questions in the Zoom Q&A chat, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm now going to pass things over to Yifat.
Hi everyone. Very exciting to be here, and thank you for joining us. I'm sorry that Thomas is not with us physically, but he will join us through his recordings talking about his testimony. So he will be kind of participating with us. And I think we just start, and we have some time in the end to speak a little bit more. Okay, so I'll do the share. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. Can you see now the front page?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So this is Thomas' testimony. The Boy Drew Auschwitz, a testimony of unique life story through the time of Second World War. I just say that Thomas is a pseudonym that my father chose after the war to allow him to live on his life. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But Thomas was born in Szczecin. In those times it was Germany. Later on, nowadays is Poland, but it used to be Germany. Firstborn boy to his parents, Berta and Eric. You can see them here. I hope you can see the arrow. Eric was a doctor, and he was also a grandson of a doctor. Berta's father was also a doctor, and he was born 1929, end of 1921, October actually 1921. Life started as regular happy life for a young boy. Nice happy childhood, busy with the family. Living in Germany as a Jew, and that this age, of course, didn't mean much, but later on, life started to change very dramatically to all Jewish citizens of Germany. In 1933, one of the changes after the rise of the Nazi regime, lots of new rules came in, restrictions, and one of them, the family was in Szczecin, as I mentioned. But because of the changes, and Thomas' father as a doctor could not work anymore in public places, and they had to move back to his hometown, which was Boyton. Boyton was on the border of Poland. And every detail I'm saying about Thomas' childhood now would be kind of significant to his story later. So he spent a few years in Boyton, growing up, happy child, very connected to nature. That also would play a role later in his life. connected to his Aunt Ruth and Aunt Irma. They teach him quite a lot about life. A boy who really, as you see on top here, has a very good technical sense. He loves machines, and he's fascinated with modern life, that he very curious about life. And on those years, as I said, life started to change more dramatically as Jews. He started his first year, we see him here in Boyton, the first day of school, very typical thing that they had those cones of candies with his mother here. We see him like a happy, naughty boy, we found that in a photo, pulling an ear of his friend. He didn't get to go many years to school, but that was a very exciting years of beginning of school years. 1938, very huge change, and one of the most dramatic scene was in November 1938, the Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glasses, where many Jews that were kind of optimistic that things can't go worse, and the probably people kind of wake up on time and stop this craziness of Nazism. That didn't happen. In 1938, the Kristallnacht proved them that they don't have any future in Germany. They must save their lives. Thomas' father being a doctor, and the men were at risk more than others. So he tried really to pull the family out to find a place to immigrate to. It was very hard in those years to immigrate. They didn't manage to do that as a family, but his father managed to get a certificate to get into England as a doctor. And in 1939, the family is splitting. Thomas' father is moving to England, and the plan was that he will draw Thomas and his mother as soon as possible later, but he lives in a summer of 39, and in September, World War II is breaking out and the borders are shut. And Thomas and his mother are left to stay in Berlin. And life in Berlin is getting more and more dangerous and challenging, being a Jew, and more Jews are moving out or disappearing or sent out to the east. Thomas, in 1942, when the Jewish schools are locked and closed, there's an option. The Jewish community gives an option to the youngsters to choose some community work. And Thomas is choosing to work in a cemetery. It's a Jewish cemetery in Weissensee. There were quite a lot of teenagers in the beginning, and they mainly were gardening and helping around. He was just 12 then, so he couldn't help with burying people, but he helped around. And as time went forward, more and more of those young people disappeared, moved out, or were gone or sent. Also, the grown-ups were less and less of them. There was one time that him and his mother were caught, and they started to collect the Jews and send them to the east, and they were caught as well. But Thomas was kind of bravely finding a solution, and he went and offered himself to work in the cemetery. He said people who had jobs that they were needed somewhere, they had more kind of a option to stay a little bit more in Berlin. So he persuaded the official people that he can help, he could work in the cemetery, and his mother was working in different works in all sorts of factories and also needed work. So he persuaded them that they let them go. So they went back to Berlin to be free in Berlin, under restrictions, of course, but for almost another year. So it was by June 43 that time became so hard. I mean, they could not support themselves anymore, could not hide anymore. It went more and more tough to stay there as Jews, and dangerous as well. So they decided to hand themselves to the authorities, hoping that the move to the east would be, they knew that people went there to work, so how harder it could be. They were used to hard work, and they really hoped that moving to the east would be a better solution for them. So it was June 43 when Thomas and his mother was put in the in Berlin to the detention camp in Grosse Hamburger Street, where his former school was, and the cemetery was around there. And they were sent with one of the last transport from Berlin, number 39, to the east, as far as they knew, but arriving to the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau. So the time is June 43, and Thomas is arriving to Auschwitz. Here we see the journey. From now on, the next 2 years, we will see Thomas' story through his drawings. And as it was mentioned in the beginning, I will briefly go through the times, but in those next 22 months, Thomas will spend 19 months in Auschwitz, Auschwitz I, men camp Auschwitz I. And then he's moved to the death march and sent to Gross-Rosen for a short while, and then again to Buchenwald. He's liberated in April 45 when Buchenwald is liberated, and stay there for another 2 months to recover. And in that time, that's where he's doing the drawings that we're going to see now, on top of postcards left on the SS quarters with some colors he got from inmates and soldiers, American soldiers. And he draws a set of over 80 drawings, kind of miniature drawings, actually a combination of sketches, lists, lyrics of songs, and mainly scenarios of life. Thomas is choosing to describe life as he experienced and his friends experienced in camp. His main motivation was to show his father, hopefully his parents, after the war, what he's been through and his friends have been through. That was a motivation to do those drawings. So now we go into Thomas' world of drawings. Here we see the gates of Birkenau, actually. When Thomas arrived in June 43, arrival was outside of the gates. Later, it was the old ramp. Later, trains started to go inwards inside the camp. But that was like out in the fields. And we can see that's the real gates nowadays. And we can see how loyal Thomas was for the truth, for the reality around him. The combination of his technical skills, his observance to details, his curiosity, his understanding by now for so many years living in Berlin, mostly on his own, like lots of street wisdom he collected in those years, being used to be around Nazis, soldiers, that was very kind of helpful when he arrived to Auschwitz, to this new unknown world. So we can see that the details was very vivid in his mind when he drew those drawings. This is the first scene at arrival, and we can hear now, I hope we can hear, let me know if you don't hear that, but we will hear Thomas explaining a few things about these drawings, and you can follow the arrow. I will show the part he's talking about.
Here at the arrival, that is the most historic picture I could ever imagine, how people arrived and sorted out who is being killed the same day. Children and invalids in the middle, as you see women for work on the top, in the middle women and invalids, and on the bottom men, sorted out by SS-men as they arrived. And of course all the luggage which they brought along, as you see historically, are left in the wagons and they never saw them again. This picture was recognized, and I'm very proud of it, at the Auschwitz Museum. And here at the arrival that...
Oh, sorry. Okay, I think it's a bit cut for some reason, the text, but Thomas has just started to say that nowadays in the museum, the Jewish block, you can see this drawing script on the walls in the memorial where they did all drawings of children that were found after the war, and Thomas' drawing is there as well. Thomas called this drawing the saddest scenario of modern life, and I think he's quite right. This drawing, Thomas shows us the process of becoming a prisoner. Here we see a citizen coming with a hat and a stick and a bag with his colored clothing, a citizen. We know that around 1.6 million people arrived to Auschwitz, and about 400,000 of them, more or less, were registered to work or were not killed at arrival, and whoever were kind of lucky to be there, to be alive in the beginning, they went through this process of becoming a prisoner. So first block or station, clothes are taken off, later to be sent back to Germany to help the citizen. They were just sent, all those clothes, shoes were sent back to Germany. Here, people are shaved, both for all hair around, all body hair. We can say maybe the motivation behind that was mainly for sanitation. But we also know that, taking off your hair and losing your head hair also had the meaning of, taking your dignity and your abilities and your feeling of self in a way. And that was part of the program of kind of illuminating people's identity. Here we see the disinfection, and then the showers and receiving uniform. And then the tattooing. Only the people who were selected to work got those tattoos. And then registration, as we know, the Germans, the Nazis were really, really strict with registration. Everything was very set. Later, when they left Auschwitz, they burned all those documents, but in the beginning, everything was really documented. And now you're out of that process, becoming a prisoner. Now, Thomas went through this process, and there are 2 points, 3 things that happened at that point, that just to tell you little stories. Of course, reading the book would explore lots of what happened in those hours. But one thing, as his arm is tattooed, Thomas is looking at the digits of the number he got. His number was 127003. Being a technical guy, he immediately kind of connected the digits, and he gets to the number of 13. They add up to be 13. And he wonders whether that be good luck. And another point, that the guy who did this tattoo, they were not allowed, all this process was done by prisoners. It was, the SS guard was just watching everything, but the prisoners did everything. There was not much direct connection between the SS officers and the prisoners. But they were not allowed to talk to them. That was part of the horrified process, that no speaking. But at that point, the tattooist was quite a young person, and he was looking up at Thomas, and he kind of blessed him and said, "Good luck to you." And that was very unusual thing to do, and gave lots of strength to Thomas. At that point, Thomas started to figure out the only men around him, older men, and he's just young, being 13, he was just 13. And he noticed that. So he thought he would be really brave and save himself. So he went to one of the German officers that he saw. He kind of pulled himself up and very strictly said, "Excuse me, sir, but I think you make a mistake here. I'm just a boy. I'm not supposed to be here with a man. Please send me to the camp of the boys, where the boys are." And that officer looked at him and says, "Go back where you came from, and one day you'll be thankful I didn't do that." It took about 24 hours later to understand the real truth about the camp where he arrived to. And 24 hours later, Thomas understands there's no camp for children, no camp for elderly, no camp to disabled people, and he's kind of lucky to be with men at that point. Here we see some of Thomas' drawings are lists. He was listing things, some from his memory and some from documents that were found later on in the SS officers. Here we see a list of Auschwitz camps. The first one, sorry, I hope you don't see. The first one is Auschwitz I. Later it was called Auschwitz. Later on it was changed to Auschwitz I, II, and III. But at Thomas' arrival, it's Auschwitz. That's the men camps, about 18,000 men. Birkenau, Buna, and other satellite camps. But actually, after a year later, they were all one big complex of Auschwitz. And spider's web, it's an impression that one of the prisoners who explained them all that, he gave that impression, spider web. Some of Thomas' drawings are maps, very, very accurate maps, some from his memory, some from documents, and some from help from people who were in those camps. So here we see a map he drew of Auschwitz I, the blocks and everything, and the next postcard was just an explanation of the drawing. Arrival to Auschwitz I, men camp Auschwitz I, first month is quarantine, and that time he connect with three other youngsters. All of them are over 15, but young compared to the others, and German from Berlin as well. And those four, the quartet, they bond together, and they set a bond to help each other all the way through. And together they decide that they want to ask to be part of a very unique project for the youth. It's called the Bricklaying School. And this is a bricklaying school drawn by Thomas. And that was a very special project meant to help the youngsters, give them a profession to help building. And that was, the idea came from another prisoner many years before in other camps, but Auschwitz had one too. So here we can hear Thomas talking about that.
Yeah, that's a bricklaying school, and that was an invention there where about 200 children were taught to lay bricks, and that saved their lives because they were sheltered and had easier work. And that I was received there. I was the third youngest at that time. Most of the other boys were Gypsies and Russians.
Boys from all over Europe were collected together, and Thomas described in his testimony the difference between how life to the youth was unique and different from the grown-ups. In some matter it was the same, in some matter it was very different, but the testimony is very focusing about what happened to the youth, how they lived together. I went through all that horrible life together, and this makes this testimony very unique to the younger generation because it's focused on the eyes of a teenager, talking about other teenagers from around the world, how they coped in different ways of coping, as well as grown-ups.
Yeah, that's a bricklaying school.
Right. Thomas, being a bricklayer.
Yeah, that's a
being a bricklayer.
Yeah, that's a bricklaying school, and that was. Yeah, that's a bricklaying school.
Sorry, allowed him to go around. Here he draws like the will of work, will of life, and how they worked as bricklayers, different things they did as bricklayers. Now, being a bricklayer was a unique job because most prisoners went to one specific job and they did that most of their time. By the way, the life expectancy of life of a prisoner was about 3 to 6 months, that's it. And Thomas was there for much longer, 22 months. It's very long for a prisoner. And so he was there for a long time to see lots of things, but being a bricklayer allowed him to move around, sometimes out of the camp, sometimes inside the camp, meeting in different group work, allow him to meet different various people, also civilians sometimes. So that gave his broad information. And that another thing that makes this testimony unique, because he saw a lot of things, he experienced lots of things and places and people, and all that is described in his testimony. Here we see a daily routine, a day life as a worker. We talk, they wake up at 6 o'clock and they worked from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening, with 1 hour break for kind of lunch, and then settling to lights off and nighttime, and 11 hours labor work a day. Another list we see here of different working groups that they were in Auschwitz I. Thomas was participating in few of them. As small as the group was, it was a bit better, because usually you just have less people and less guarding of the SS and more of prisoners guarding, which was a bit better. Here we see the hierarchy of prisoners. As I said, in Auschwitz, most of daily life was handled by prisoners in hierarchy, different capos, block elders, and so on. The SS guards were more outside. Jews were not allowed to, in Auschwitz I, to those works. The maximum a Jew could be was a working commander. Here is with the roll call, and I let Thomas speak here as well.
And this is very warm to my heart, because it shows all my comrades, fellow prisoners, lined up at night. Why? If somebody was missing, we had to stand for hours till they found out. He may have fallen asleep, he may have died somewhere, or we don't know. So we had to stand there. And of course, people say, you see the block elder in blue, yes. And then you see the SS man, and people say, yes, I drew them big because I was afraid of the SS. I wasn't afraid. Some SS men were smaller. I was taller than some of the SS men anyhow. So I wanted to show his equipment, his boots, his revolver, his stick, his cap, and all this I wanted to show how it was, the camp guards, SS guards.
Here we see the vermin, the different disease I had, the vermin, sorry. There's another drawing we don't see here about the diseases, but the vermin was a very problematic things in such a tight place, so many people in a very tight place. And that was very dangerous to get those. Here we see a list. Thomas, as we said, very technical guy. He lists what exactly what they ate. Here he compared the life in Auschwitz and in Buchenwald, a daily daily food, the amount of food ration, daily rations in each day, exactly what they ate. We see they have 1 liter of soup. About 350 grams of bread in Auschwitz. It's less, even less in Buchenwald later. A little bit of margarine, and some days they get a little bit of jam. Twice a week, a little bit of sausage. And the amount, as mentioned before, was not, people were not expected to live long on that amount. And of course, to survive, they had to organize a little bit more food. Here we see the delivery food that was cooking for so many people was, of course, they could not provide real good food. And when we say soup, it was mainly water with sometimes a bit of vegetables in it, and sometimes even things like shoes and things that were not edible in normal life, but anything to put some kind of nutrition was useful. And in winter times, people used to eat the snow, and that was quite nutritious as well. Here we see how people had to organize extra food. That was really a main thing to survive. Anything from peels or peels of vegetables found in the garbage, or rotten cabbage, or food for the horse, or rotten food, anything would be good enough to nutrition, a little bit more than the little food they had. Here we see the selection, and let Thomas speak here.
And this is the most dangerous situation. Twice a year they had a selection to, and that didn't matter there whether we are Jewish, Gypsy, Russian, or Christian German or Polish Christian. Didn't matter what origin you were. You had to run naked. And now it's very interesting historical. If you had any wounds on the Körper from working with bricks and maybe wounds, or any exams or any other, or you limped or you didn't walk along, and even what is historically important, people don't know that, even if you wore glasses on your head, you were sorted out to be killed. And here, as you see, these people don't walk home, they run home because they're afraid the SS-man may open the door and says, "You little guy, come back again, how old are you?" They could do that. Yes, that's a very dangerous situation. I went through about 3 of these situations.
Okay, and
this is the most...
Sorry, I have to apologize. I'll I'll go quickly through the rest so we can have, I see the time here. So I go briefly through a few more drawings and let Thomas speak about a few more. So we set the time. So here we see dangers, main dangers, life in the camp. As you see, that's the most, the strongest color Thomas used to those things that a prisoner has to be very careful about. So we see the crematorium, of course, the illnesses and disease, punishment, and the bunker. Here, just to show Thomas' testimony is, he says, I was like a journalist going around the camp, describing all life, not much of his personal experience, but around him. So Thomas mentioned lots of different prisoners. Here we see a drawing mentioning the gypsies. There's a lot about, Thomas was very friendly with the gypsies. He talks a lot about them, described a lot about their experiences in the camp. The Jehovah's Witness and others, mentioning prisoners from around Europe, not only Jews. In Auschwitz I, the percentage of Jews was very small, actually, sometimes less than 20%, even sometimes less than 10% Jews. Of course, other camps, the percentage was different, but Jews were mainly killed at arrival. And Thomas mentioned all the different prisoners around him. Here we see another kind of drawings. Some of his drawings are lyrics of songs that prisoners used to sing. Now, the world of music was very significant to Thomas, as encouraging, as even therapeutic sometimes, reminding them of normality of life, rising their spirits up, and others, and lots of that in the story as well. The ABC, just ABC of life in what was the main words that accompany life in the camp. And we see here that Thomas say, "Oh, I don't like this drawing, it's very childish," but we do see Thomas was a boy, he was very young, and that was his way to show his life through the alphabet of life in the camp.
And this is also very memorable. It's not the exodus of the Jews. Of course, the percentage of Jews in the camp, which I was camp number 1 in Auschwitz, were less than 10%, sometimes even 2%, most other people. Now here the exodus out of Auschwitz, and you see everybody is carrying something. And then people ask me at schools, I've been for 20 years, I've been moving about the schools all over Europe. Who is me? I didn't think about this me. And of course, it's the little one on the bottom who's got no luggage and no blankets tied to him. That is me, or supposed to be. And then very historically important also for me, on the bottom you see a real fire and it looks real, and a block elder supervising it, and then even an SS-man stands by to see that all the documents of Auschwitz are being burned. Well, I have drawn everything, my things are alive and kicking everywhere. So that there was no burning, the documents didn't help. And here we get provisions for the long exodus all the way to Buchenwald.
Okay, from shortage of time, I will describe briefly here. This is a scenario from the death march, marching from Auschwitz to Laszlo, the train station, and then driven by train. So we see on top here the train, open wagon, we're talking about January in Poland, freezing cold. Many people died that part just from the freezing. And by the March, we can see amazing scenarios of people hardly dragging themselves through the snow with no good shoes. Thomas himself had 2 different shoes, not fitting his shoe size, but they had to go through that. And even though they were still helping each other, carrying each other, and even Thomas described, as young as he was, as weak as he was, there was constantly people leaning on his shoulders, and he helped people around to do this very dangerous march.
And here
marching through with the train to the first station was Gross-Rosen, a camp, very dangerous camp. He was there just for a shorter time, a few weeks. And then again, they were evacuated as the Germans was moving backwards to Germany. The prisoners were evacuated to the east, sorry, to the west. Arriving to Buchenwald, that Buchenwald camp was already in Germany. And it was different. It was the camp was established in 1937. There were lots of political prisoners. They actually established a very developed underground. One of the things that it was a camp police, very unique to Buchenwald, and that was very helpful. They helped each other more. They guarded, they took care of prisoners, and especially the young ones. The young were taken care very specially by the other prisoners. And Thomas was saved a few times by the underground. All those stories, of course, in his testimony. I let Thomas speak for the liberation scenario, I think so.
And here the famous scene, historic scenes, liberation of Buchenwald, and there are 6 different versions of the liberation, and only one is true. The moment the 3 American tanks on the left with the American flag very historically drawn, they actually came on this side of the camp. That's the main entrance of the camp. There was a revolt, and we had 200 people with arms, and we stormed the camp. We drove out the camp guards. And my own theory of the liberation is completely different to official ones. We had, as you see on top, we had captured 1 machine gun, and that was hidden for 1 year. It was hidden in under the floor. And when we started shooting with a machine gun, I reckon that the guards thought the Americans are shooting inside. They never figured out the prisoners have a machine gun. So they thought the Americans have arrived inside the camp, and most of them fled. That was the real story of the liberation. As you see these men here, an SS-man with his arms up, and another arm also arms up. He tried to hide himself by putting blue prisoners. They said, take off your jacket, and there he had the SS uniform. And some of it only had whips, and they didn't have all rifles. And as you see very accurately, the rifle, I'm very proud of. You see the rifle is aimed exactly onto the man, and he's shaking the rifle. It's a very historic picture of the celebration of.
Okay.
And here the.
So as we hear that Buchenwald was self-liberated by the prisoners underground and the prisoners, and just short while after, the American soldiers arrived in, shocked by what they see. They were filming everything afterwards, and the prisoner was showing them around. Later also civilians were brought in just to see the horrors of what happened in there. Thomas speak a bit more about the American friend. Unfortunately, we don't have time to hear the whole testimony, but here he talks about the American arrival. Of course, that was very amazing time, being free again for the first time.
And here.
The roll call, I let Thomas speak here, I think.
And then on the 1st of May, the big march passed. And I was with the German, I was a German column, exactly, some columns were very big in nations, the German column. I held up a poster and I marched past here, you've got the flags of Britain and the States and Russia with Stalin on it, Roosevelt on it, Churchill on it. We marched past, and then the camera was turned on me, and that was something very very moving. These photos got lost, the camera, all these films got lost, but I was marching there, very proud, 1st of May.
Yeah, so this was a scene of victory. That is also, there are official films of that scenario, and Thomas was there with one of the flags. It took Thomas 2 months to recover. Here we will see Thomas after liberation. Before liberation, by the underground put them in blocks, the teenagers in one block 66. Here we see Thomas is not in this photo, but we see other inmates about his age. So he was probably one of these these boys, more or less. He couldn't walk at that stage. He was too weak and too wounded in his legs, so he couldn't walk. The only thing he could do was sit in his barrack. He was moved to barracks 29 with German speakers, and there he was with other underground members that collected. One of them was Eugen Koigen, a very famous historian, and together with the other underground, they collected information from the SS officers, and all that information was piled in one single table in their block. And that allowed Thomas, first of all, to be exposed to lots of information. And also he sat on the same table and he did those drawings for 2 months, from April to June. He was doing those drawings. I go very briefly through what happened after liberation, because the time is kind of finishing soon. Thomas has, there was a project, there was a big question what to do with all the survivors. Most of them did not have where to go back to. Some of the youngest did not have, were orphans by that point, no families, no place to go back to. And it was a big question around Europe, what to do with those youngsters. And Thomas was choosing to join a project from Switzerland. There were about 400 boys and girls were sent to Switzerland for recovery. And Thomas is one of them. Here we see the trains of the teenagers just before being sent. Thomas arrived to Switzerland first. He arrived to Rheinfelden for a quarantine, where he gets really ill again and he's hospitalized for a while. After that, he's moved to Sugerberg with about 100 and a bit of more than 100 boys and girls. And this is where Thomas' story and Charlie Inglefield's story connect. Soon, in a few moments, we'll hear Charlie. But this is a connection, Sugerberg, how those two stories end up together 74 years later. But here we see the boys of Sugerberg, and here we see Thomas. He is a second on top here on the right. Thomas is 15 at liberation, and he's in Switzerland, and by his 16th birthday in October 45, the Red Cross helped Thomas and his father find each other. At that point, they don't know what's going on, what happened with his mother, but they find each other. And in November 45, Thomas is joining his father in London, in England, and he becomes an English citizen. And at that point, they understand that his mother did not survive the camps. Thomas joined his father, that's his father Eric, after those long years of separation. They unite. Thomas is finishing his studies. He becomes a building engineer from the Bricklaying School in Auschwitz. He becomes a building engineer. And then in the age of 20, the best surprise of his life, his father is remarried, and Thomas becomes an older brother to his younger sister, Judith. And at that point, he makes a huge decision, and he decides to immigrate to Israel and be part of building the Jewish state. And as an engineer, he comes to Israel, 1950. He starts to work in the Jewish agency, helps to build Israel, building whole houses and buildings all around Israel. A very, very young state at that age, at that stage. He joined the army as an officer, an engineering officer in the engineering unit, fighting all the wars of Israel, getting married, having 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and a year and a bit ago, his first great-granddaughter in Val. And so he became a great-grandfather and a grandfather and a father, a very proud one, and a brother here with his sister Judith. 81, a Thomas story was published in 58 for the first time as a pocketbook and 81 was the time his life changed, because there was a gathering of survivors. He found one of his friends from the camp, and at that point he decided to be an active witness. He republished his testimony in 85 and 7 again, and then was an album of his books still available in Buchenwald, and a film about his life with Dr. Willem Rosing, a documentary about his story, very unique one, and that he's started to be an active witness for over 20 years. He went around Europe talking to audiences, and just later on, about 1916 was the last journey, and then he decided not to travel anymore, but he got to speak to audiences in Israel, in Yad Vashem, nowadays in Zoom. And here where the story connects to Charlie, and Charlie, I'll let you speak in a moment. Charlie heard of Thomas' story, and he thought, it's been so many years since the testimony was out, and thanks to his enthusiasm and will, Thomas' story is out again to the world in a new version, in a new edition. Last year in the UK for the first time, in summer in the US, and now this last January, a second edition in England again, already translated to various languages, and getting to new audiences, which we are very happy to see. And I just mentioned here, if anyone wants to connect Thomas, ask him questions, we're happy to do that. That's his email, thomasgeve@gmail.com, and the website is rebuilt now, so it's going to be renewed soon, but it's thomasgeve.com. Last words, I let Thomas speak, and then we hear Charlie, and thank you for listening.
People ask me if I'm happy about my new book. Well, there's nothing happy about the past, but it is good that the 40 prisoners who helped me to survive 2 years of concentration camps have all become alive again all over the world.
Thank you so much. Charlie, your turn.
Thank you very much, Yifat. That was a wonderful presentation. And I just wanted to say a very quick thank you to Sydney and the team at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York for giving us this opportunity to talk today, to talk about the book. We're very grateful and very honored. I'm just going to spend a few minutes really talking about the book behind the book, the actual process of putting a book like this together. And I guess I split it into 3 parts. The first part is, how did the book come about? The second part is the strategy, the direction of the book. And 3, I guess, is the learnings and the objectives of what we hope the reader takes from reading a book like this. So to get things started, the book really came about through the most random of circumstances. My family and I, we lived in Zug, a little expat town outside of Zurich, in March 2019. I had a friend of mine, Natalie Albrecht, who told me about an exhibition that was taking place at the Berg Museum in Zug called The Children of Buchenwald. And one of the photos Yifat showed on one of our last slides, I think it was the top left-hand corner, was actually the main photograph on the flyer. And Natalie handed me this flyer. It's where I first saw the name Thomas Geve. And like most of us do, when something piques our interest, we go onto google.com, we put the name in. I put Thomas's name in, and that's when I first saw some of his amazing drawings, which really hit me. The simplicity, the powerful images that he drew. And I also saw thomasgeve.com, and I wrote an email to thomasgeve.com very, very soon afterwards. And Yifat and I think we talked very, very soon afterwards. And I was like a sponge, to be honest. In other words, I just sort of listened and was fascinated about Thomas's life, not just his life as a boy, and not just his experiences about the Holocaust, but his life after all of those horrendous events took place. And Yifat and I talked about the fact that two of his books obviously came out. One was in 1958, Youth in Chains, as Yifat mentioned, also Guns and Barbed Wire in 1987. So it'd been a long time since audiences had arguably read his experiences, and I think that was what really inspired me and Yifat to say, well, let's bring it to today's audiences. I was on a plane to Israel in July 2019. I spent a wonderful week with Yifat, with her family, as well as with Thomas. It was quite daunting, and I should add in here that at the time, I wasn't an author. I'm certainly not an expert. I'm not a historian. I'm not Jewish either. I was just a fan of Thomas's story. I felt inspired reading his second book, Guns and Barbed Wire. And Yifat and I basically said, well, let's go for it. Let's see whether we can take it to today's audiences. So that in a nutshell was the sort of first stage to this, you know, the book behind the book. The second was obviously, how do we go about this? The strategy, the direction on putting a book together like this. And to be perfectly honest, as simplistic as it sounds, it was to actually have a direction. And I was incredibly lucky in the fact that we had the content. The content from Guns and Barbed Wire was an amazing story to read. We had a selection of Thomas's drawings as well. So it was really about updating Thomas's testimony as part of this third edition as the book we know now, which is The Boy Who Drew Auschwitz. And I guess from my perspective, one of the key was to provide a flow to the reader, allow the reader to digest, to hopefully discover, to take a bit of a pause as well, because there are so many extraordinary stories and events that Thomas goes through. And therefore, one of the first points to the strategy was to provide a few more chapters just to allow the reader to have that flow. The second key aim, I guess, was to provide more references, more footnotes, so both visual as well as text references and footnotes, because Thomas mentions, you know, places, names, people he was acquaintances with, dates as well, just to hopefully help the reader along as they read the story. And I would also add in that we wanted to add in some photographs as well, because particularly when Buchenwald was liberated, hopefully it was a way for the reader to obviously go through Thomas's story, but have a few reference points as well. And some of the photographs were put in for that point. So I guess I finish it in terms of the learnings and objectives, and I look at this from a personal perspective as well. You know, here we are nearly 3 years on, and I still get shivers listening to Thomas's voice. I hope Yifat and Thomas don't mind me saying this, but you know, Thomas is a man of detail. He doesn't suffer fools gladly. It was quite a daunting experience working with Thomas right at the beginning, but he made me feel very much at ease. And it was obviously a huge privilege. I don't think Yifat and I stopped learning, to be perfectly honest. When we do talk, there seems to be new bits of information coming to light. One of the key learnings I take was towards the beginning of the process of putting this book together. Thomas often talked about creatures, wild animals, in terms of describing or descriptions, expressions and meanings. And at the beginning, I didn't really understand what these descriptions meant. And therefore I thought, well, if it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me, should we include it? Whereas actually learning through the process and learning more about Thomas and what he went through, if you change descriptions or if you change his meanings, you're changing what he wanted to describe at the time as a boy. And that goes absolutely against, you know, what we should be learning from a survivor like Thomas. So there are so many learnings I could mention, but I will only mention that one. The objective behind the book, look, what I hope, and I know what the family hopes, is whilst we have survivors like Thomas with us, they remain the last human link to this infamous piece of history, this period of history. And I guess the aim behind doing this updated version of Thomas's testimony is to ensure all generations, it's not just future generations, it's all generations, that this event never happens again. And we have Thomas's voice and Thomas's experiences to hopefully help in that process. And I say this rather sadly because obviously what the tragic events happening in Ukraine at the moment. So I hope that just gives you a little bit about the book behind the book, the process of putting a book like this together. And thank you very much for listening in.
Thank you so much, Charlie and Yifat. And before we move into audience Q&A, I had the opportunity to talk to Thomas with Yifat, and I recorded a couple, or Yifat rather, recorded a few of his answers. So I'm only going to play 2 right now before we move into sort of the live Q&A, but I think this will also answer some of the questions that have been coming throughout the program. So this first slide is really about what happened to Thomas's friends. Yifat mentioned that he had made, he was with a group of other children in the camp. So I asked him what happened to them. Oh, can you hear that? Nope. Okay. Hold on. I think I forgot to share my sound. There we go. Okay. Let's try that again.
He now lives, I don't know if he's still alive, but he went to live in the United New York.
Oh,
look, there's saucy girls. He now lives, I don't know if he's still alive, but he went to live in the United New York. There's dark girls who went to live in Australia. And there's little Berger who went back to Belgium. And that is 3 of them. And one, Leo the Dutchman, I contacted his wife, and unfortunately he died in the Mauthausen camp just before liberation. Very sad. And now, where did I get the information? Not from my parents. I hardly met my parents. I lived with my grandmother. So I read the newspapers and also listened to the radio. That's where I got my information from.
So then this next question that I'm going to share is, I had asked Thomas a little bit about, we kind of got into the history of the book from his perspective, and he also kind of talked about how the drawings were stored, which is another question that was coming through throughout the program. So here we go.
Actually, the pictures I drew for my father in England to inform him exactly what happened. That was where the pictures came in. And of course, technically speaking, they couldn't be published for many, many years because, as they said, the publishers in London in 46, your sonny boy is not a Picasso. We cannot print his pictures. You know how much money it costs. For many years in Europe, you couldn't print colored pictures. So I had to write it down. And of course, the first book editions came out without pictures, yes. And I used the pictures to write the book, yes. And of course, there are several. The present version of the book is already version number 6. Yeah, there are all different versions. It's good that the book has been alive all the time.
Okay, so now I'm going to move into some of the questions that you have asked to Yifat and Charlie. So Yifat, how old were you when you first learned about these drawings and about what had happened to Thomas?
Thomas' testimony was originally written in English. And when we were younger, he did not talk about, he separated his personal life to his present life from past life. So he did not speak about his testimony. There was a book. We knew of the book, but my English was not good enough to read such a book when I was younger. And only when I was 21, I took the book with a dictionary, word to word, and struggled to read through it, but more or less got the story. But as Charlie mentioned, up to this day, when I read the testimony, every time I come into new information. So later on, just the last decade, I became more as a partner to my father. He was willing to share his testimony with me, and I became, his it's my role now to carry the testimony once he already wants to retire. And so I keep on studying and interviewing him about things and keep on getting more information. So it's kind of a live testimony. It's keep on changing, and more information comes out. So I guess also the books would, with years, we hope to add more and more information as we gather it as well.
Thank you. And I think this is a question for both Charlie and Yifat, but do you think that this is a book that is appropriate for students to read? And do you hope that this is something that will be used in schools going forward?
Yifat, I'm happy to take the first part to this. Yeah, it's a good question. I've been asked this question a number of times over the last few weeks. Look, from my personal perspective, I feel this book is probably appropriate from the ages of 13 and above. I think children younger than that, it's still quite it's a very powerful book. It is traumatic in some ways. And obviously when you're talking about maturity and the right time to listen and learn from this kind of event, then from a personal perspective, I think 13 and above.
Yeah, and I would add that I agree with every word of Charlie, and I would add that this testimony aimed to all ages, from teenagers and above, and it's unique because it's a teenager's eye, so teenagers can relate to this story, and also it brings out very much of the difference, how the teenagers related to what's going on around them, not just life in camp, also before and after. And Thomas made lots of conversation with his inmates, so you can see a different way of thinking and the difference between grown-ups way of thinking and the teenagers. And also because of the drawings, of course, that makes it more, the language of the drawings relate to any age. I did the testimony for very young ages, just using certain, like the food and the daily life, comparing to the nowadays life, the ABC, for instance. It was recommended by Ministry of Education in some countries in Europe already, and it's just getting to known again. So we hope that we do aim for education, of course. Educating the young generation makes a difference because it affects their lives nowadays. And the meaningful messages of this testimony is not just about the past, it's very relevant to nowadays life, and not just about the Holocaust, about human beings, about human relations, about coping with trauma, coping with events in your life. So that's very relevant values to nowadays. So we hope to aim to the younger generation as well, of course, yes.
So I know we're a bit over time, but Yifat, I know you have one final testimony from Thomas to share with us just about what he hopes we all get out of the book and his message.
Yeah, so that's very short message from Thomas. I will share the screen again. Sorry.
Dear listeners, in April 1945, when I was liberated from the camp Buchenwald at the age of 15, I decided to document what I saw and experienced during 2 years, together with my friends at the camps of Auschwitz, Gross-Rosen, and Buchenwald, in a set of over 80 drawings, lists, and maps. 2 years later, I started also to write. From the years of 90, I am active as witness and tell about the past. I'm asked why I did this. I chose to record and tell about the past because it is important for me that also those that were not there could learn about the past and know exactly what happened. To remember the past and learn from the past. To be active accordingly and do good. Thomas Geve.
So I just want to add a short note, first of all, as well, to thank Sydney and the museum for this opportunity. We are very honored, and thank you for sharing. Thank you, Charlie, again, for being our, we call you guardian angel, but really for bringing this testimony out of the world again. We want to thank HarperCollins for taking this book on to new audiences, and all our partners around, all the translators that have been translating the book, all the editors, all the teams around the world that helped to bring out this testimony. It's an opportunity to thank everyone, and all the people who support Thomas from his first day in camps, after camps, all the years through. All his friends around the world supported him, each one in his way. And I think the main Thomas wrote message here is just to remember life matters, people matter. Every person can make a difference for good and for bad, and but the history was done by people, and in nowadays, I mean, the future is our decision nowadays. And as Charlie mentioned, we see that now live around us, around the world, and the power of unity is endless, and we can defeat any darkness through bringing light together. And I think that's the main message of all Holocaust survivors. It's our responsibility as next generation to make sure that the sacrifice and whatever happened, the green past would not be for vain. Because if we learn from that past and we make a difference for a better future, then the past matter, we make the past matter and meaningful to the rest of our lives and to the rest of the generation, to our children and grandchildren. So we hope this word will be a better word, a kinder word. That's Thomas' words. We hope for a better word and a kinder word to everyone, everywhere. It's up to us. So we wish the word a peaceful time to every person around this world that is not free. So freedom and peace to everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Yifat, and thank you to Charlie as well. This was such an amazing presentation, and I know it's been really meaningful to a lot of people. We've been getting some really great comments in the chat, and I would like to thank all of you out there in the internet for joining us today. And I would also really like to thank Thomas as well for all of his contributions to today's presentation and for his testimony and his book. Everything we do at the museum is made possible through donor support. To those of you watching, we hope you'll consider making a donation to support the museum or becoming a member and joining us for our upcoming programs, which you can check out at the link in the Zoom chat. Also, please go out and buy The Boy Who Drew Auschwitz, which you can also find at the link in the Zoom chat. Have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you all again at another program. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you very much.
So much. Thank you, everyone.